Okay, Peter, today I have the pleasure of being with Peter Fisk after a long time. I don't know, perhaps some 14 years ago or so, when we met in England or Ireland, I'm not sure, on the occasions of the meetings of the board of directors of the MC. So Peter, it's a real pleasure to talk to you again. And so I hope, should the pandemic allow, that we will meet this year again in Oporto. Okay, let me just introduce a bit of your biography. I saw something in your website. It's really a sentence that I loved. So Peter Fisk, and quoting, Peter Fisk is a global thought leader, best-selling author and inspiring speaker, whose career was forged into a superconductivity lab, accelerated by managing supersonic travel brands, shaped in corporate development, evolved in a digital startup, and formalized as CEO of the world's largest marketing network. I think that it is really genius, this sentence. Okay. So just to give a broader view, Peter is a professor of leadership strategy and innovation at the IE Business School in Madrid. He is also Thinkers 50 Global Director and founder of the European Business Forum. Having trained as a nuclear physicist, Peter moved to managing brands like Concorde and British Airways, helping Microsoft to adopt a value-heavy marketing model and Virgin to launch into new markets. Okay, Peter, you have around 30 years of practical business experience, the same as me, I believe, around it. You have worked in more than 300 companies and 55 countries, with several brands as Coca-Cola, Mars, I don't know, Red Bull, Tata, Virgin, Vodafone, American Express, Cartier, and so on and so forth. Peter has written several books, some of them translated, at least Martin Genius is translated into Portuguese also, apart from other 35 languages. So I think we can begin with our group of questions. Thanking again for being with me again here. So Peter, what has your physics background brought to you as far as your activity as business and strategy consultant?
So firstly, Carlos, great to talk to you. Great to see you. How has physics helped me in my business career? Well, I guess, I did physics because I wanted to understand the world. And as a marketer, what you need to do is to understand the world. So it's a different world. It's not the natural world. It's more about the consumer world. Yeah. But it's still about understanding how things work. And I think there's two real things which I take from physics. Firstly, is the idea of being able to test ideas and learn from them. So all physics is actually a creative process. So it's hypothesis driven. And so being able to kind of come up with a concept and then be able to test that concept or that hypothesis, typically in a laboratory. And so that's the same when we do any form of business or marketing. We're always coming up with concepts, hypotheses, and then we're testing to see if they work. That's how we move forwards. But more generally, I guess, with physics, I started my business career with British Airways. And when I did start working in business, everybody said, "You're the physicist, you can do the spreadsheets," which was nice. But I find I can do the spreadsheets, but they're a bit boring. So I wanted to do the more creative stuff, the more people stuff as well. So what I found was that I didn't want to be either left brain, which is the logic, the analysis, and I didn't purely want to be the right brain, the intuitive side. I wanted to be left brain and right brain. And so when I wrote my first book, which was Marketing Genius, it was about Einstein and Picasso, and how Einstein, despite being fantastic with hypotheses and ideas, he was a terrible mathematician. So he used his right brain and then he applied his left brain to prove it. Or Picasso, maybe as you know, because he grew up in Spain, then he started by studying mathematics. So he was a left brain person to start with, and then he created fantastic art, and he created new genres of art like impressionism. And so he was able to use his intuition on top of his analysis. So his left brain plus his right brain. So a genius for me, or a marketing genius, my first book was about left brain and right brain. How can you be Einstein and Picasso in today's marketplaces?
Yes, I agree. Apparently, I would say for a new marketer that comes to the market, he must be half artist and half scientist, so to speak, because
Absolutely.
actually, can you describe briefly the activity of your company?
So what I do is I spend my time writing books. So that's kind of my fun bit. That's really an opportunity to think and to research and to kind of explore new ideas. But you don't make any money from writing books. So really the purpose of writing books is to have new ideas which I can then talk about and help companies to develop in terms of practice. So I spend my time in three ways. Firstly is in terms of consulting, which is helping real companies to do real things. So it's very practical. Recent examples might include everything from the largest companies like Microsoft, in terms of I've been working with them in terms of redefine their whole go-to-market process across the world, and then with small companies. So, for an example, a fashion and textile company, in terms of how can they launch their brand onto Amazon. So they're consulting. So that's real world, understanding what's really happening. Then it's about kind of talking about that. So keynote speaking. So a lot of inspirational keynote speeches around the world. And then thirdly, education. So I spend a lot of time, and particularly at IE Business School based in Madrid, where I lead their senior executive programs in terms of thinking about how do people become better business leaders.
Okay. Well, one can say, a much broader question, one can say that capitalism is in its present shape might be at an alley, so to speak. I mean, several, even I think I heard Philip Butler talking about it, and other academics talking about this. I mean, it has not solved actually all the problems that societies have. Apparently and gladly, there are no alternative systems. But as far as as this system is concerned, anyhow, it hasn't solved all the problems. So we began to hear talking about stakeholder capitalism, sustainable capitalism, conscious capitalism, and other words saying almost the same thing. I think it will be a bit difficult because most of CEOs are really concerned with 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 the with the with the results, with the profit and with the market. So, what do you think about this?
Well, it's a great question and a big subject at the moment. I guess really this subject goes back 3 years to 2018, when Larry Fink, who's the CEO and the chairman of BlackRock, the world's largest investment company, he said to all the companies, all the CEOs who he invests in, he said, "I will only continue to invest if you can demonstrate purpose beyond making money, beyond profit." And so, really driving that need to demonstrate how do they do good for the world, what is their positive impact for society or for the environment or in some other way, beyond just making money. And after that, we saw the business roundtable. So the top 30 leaders in America, CEOs, they kind of declared stakeholder capitalism was important. World Economic Forum talked about that. So it's become a big topical issue. Now, I don't think it's ever not been an issue, because the way in which an organization can succeed is by looking after its customers, looking after its employees, looking after its suppliers, and looking after the communities where it works, because they provide the employees and the customers. So I don't think there's ever been actually a time when that hasn't been true. the problem is that we have just measured the financial impact, and particularly in recent times, I guess we've become more greedy, particularly with sort of short-term thinking about shareholding and so on. It's really driven people to be more and more profit focused and short-term focused, which is a big challenge when you want to build a brand, or when you want to invest in the future, and when you want to do longer term things. And the other thing which has happened, that companies have really lost trust. So consumers trust companies and executives less than ever before. So I think what's happened is actually that people have realized that it needs to be a much more joined up circular way of creating value, that the only way to sustain value is to do more for your customers, to do more for employees, and to do more for the world, for society at the same time. So to me, that's a really important one, and particularly be driven by something more than just making money. Why do you get up in the morning? So having this purpose as a company, which actually means that you contribute to the world in some other way than just being a money-making machine for some owners. And having that bigger reason means that people will trust you more, means that employees will want to work with you more. But you've got to get it in balance. You still have to make money at the same time. And we saw just a few weeks ago, Danone, where they dismissed their CEO, Emmanuel Faber, because his financial performance wasn't good enough. He was doing fantastic things in terms of sustainability and having more purpose. He'd become a B corporation. So he'd done fantastic stuff from that point of view, but his company was underperforming financially. So all of this stuff is great, having a purpose, doing more for the world, but you have to also deliver the financial results at the same time.
Yes, sure. Difficulty. It's really a question of balance. But what seems to me, at least to me, is that as a concept, this question of stakeholder capitalism is not new as a concept. But transforming, integrating this into a company's policy, it's more difficult. And how can we? Which is the balance? At the end of the day, the balance is fixed by the shareholders or by the CEO, but in line with the shareholders. So it's rather a difficult question. I hope it won't be an utopia.
I think it's also a great opportunity for marketers to really think about their business and their brand in particular as a platform for good. So there's a great book written by Mark Benioff, the guy who's the CEO of Salesforce, called Trailblazer. And he talks about how businesses have the best assets to solve the world's biggest problems. And so Philip Kotler talks about this, for example, with Christian Sarkar in his new book. And businesses have huge customer bases. They have huge resources in terms of employees and distribution channels. They have fantastic brands, which people love. So if you can create products and services which people want, but can also do good at the same time, then you can use capitalism in a positive way to solve all sorts of problems. I mean, we've seen examples like Tom's Shoes, for example, but many more examples than that. How can you really use the positive force of capitalism and the positive force of brands and marketing as a way in which you can actually help people to solve real social and environmental problems at the same time as getting what they want and businesses being successful?
Yeah, actually, and apparently there are some movements that begin to arise. The conscious capitalism org, American one, and also I just attended some days ago Philip Kotler with Starcar launching what they call the Wicked 7 project. I don't know if you have heard about, but this project is also concerning globally, how can not only marketers, but how can managers, how can people contribute to the change? But it's on the table, the subject. So Peter, you have used the expression of future faster in one of your writings. Can you expand a bit this concept, please?
Well, I guess two ways of looking at it. Firstly, that if we look at how has the world changed in recent times, then I think over the last 20 years, there's an amazing quotation which says that markets have got 4 times faster. So if you take into account the speed at which new products are developed, or the speed of innovation of products and services to markets, but also the shortening of the cycle time, then you get a much faster turnover, a much faster speed of ideas and change within markets. Another way of looking at it is looking forwards, that it's going to get even faster. So I start the book and talk about how we'll probably see more change in the next 10 years than the last 250 years. But if you look at some people like Peter Diamandis, for example, from Singularity, he talks about how we'll probably see more like 3,000 years of change, not just 250 years of change in the next 10 years. And I think what's driving that is obviously the speed of ideas happening and the speed of change within a market, but also the power of technologies connecting. So it's really networks, so the connections between technologies. And I think one of the most important laws within business, which we should all be aware of, it's not Moore's law. We all heard of Moore's law, meaning the power of computing. But Metcalfe's law, Robert Metcalfe was the founder of 3Com, and he says he describes Metcalfe's law, says the value of a network is proportional to the square of its nodes. So every time you get an extra connection or an extra member in a network, or an extra device in a network, you get a multiplication of the number of connections. So be it in terms of people in a social community, or be it in terms of IoT connections between devices, then you get an exponential impact every time you increase the size of a network. And I think that's the thing which is really driving the accelerated speed over the next 10 years, for example.
For instance, you might have read something about it. When we are in Europe, at least in some countries, others that they began with already, with the 5G, China is already studying the 6G, which apparently will be 1,000 times faster than 5G, which actually is really really happening. So I don't know. We never know how we'll end our days. Okay. Another question, please. Technology has been provoking a lot of disruptions in all activities, and also, of course, in marketing. Don't you think that a theoretical example, if all the companies deal with the same big data using the cloud, statistics, AI algorithms, and so on, they might all come to approximately the same conclusions and insights?
Well, that's a great question. So I guess that would only be the case if they all were trying to do the same thing. So if they're all trying to target the same market, the same customers, with the same products. But of course, they're not. And one of the big mistakes which we make in marketing is we try to target too many people, or the average consumer. So we try to think of the entire marketplace as one still. And we all learned the rules of segmentation and value propositions and all that kind of stuff, but we don't listen to it. Yeah. So I think the real thing is that the skill of a marketer is to say, who is your audience? What is your market? And to be quite selective. You don't need all your customers, so think about which customers you really do want to target and who can you be really relevant to. We spend too much time in marketing thinking about competitiveness when we should be thinking about relevance. So instead of just being different from your competition, you need to think more about being relevant to your particular target audience. And I was working with P&G on that, for example, and they always think about competitive advantage. How is our product better than somebody else's? But really, they realize that they should be thinking much more about, for them, consumers, and how can they be more relevant to the consumer, which comes with having a consumer-centric rather than a product-centric mindset. So I think that's part of it. And the other part of it is in terms of thinking about the marketplace itself. So are you in the drinks business? Are you in the food business? Are you in the automotive business? These definitions of markets can change. Red Bull came along and they said, we are not in the drinks business, we're in the energy drinks business. And so they changed the definition of their market. So they went from 5% market share to 100% market share when they started the market. So, measuring things like market share is pretty stupid, because it's a notional concept of that we all work in the same market, which is not true. And the same goes for geography. Why do we think of Portugal as one market rather than connecting it to other markets, for example? And the same goes in terms of thinking about, how do we think about categories and the definition of the product-based markets which we're in. So I think AI and data have an incredible, powerful force in terms of being able to understand people better, being able to market in real time, being able to understand what's happening, be able to personalize. But I think you still have to use some of the most basic marketing principles, like segmentation, in the first place, in order to add to that.
Yeah. For instance, as you know, Lindstrom talks about the small data in terms of observing a bit the behavior of people and trying to. But that's a perspective.
I think there's some interesting examples. I mean, if you look at the stock market, for example, it goes even more for that. So if you apply artificial intelligence to the stock markets of the world, to Wall Street, then you should be able to anticipate what's going to happen. Therefore, you'd have perfect investments, and you should make $1 trillion every day. But then everybody can't. So, so there is something happening there.
But my point was that apparently, if all the main, I would say, marketing techniques turn into automatic, and what's left for people to say, and what's left for people to decide. And I believe that the differentiation starts with the interpretation that people do try to put in the different outputs of AI, of the big data, and so on. So there's still a role for human being in all of this.
Well, yeah, and as we get more choice, then people make choices based on much more emotional factors. We all know that. Sure. Any research which you do, that's why design thinking has become so popular, for example, because we recognize that these more intuitive, more human, more emotional things make all the difference. And so being able to understand how can you truly do something which a computer can't do is really added value of a business. That's why businesses will have automated supply chains, automated finance functions, but will still have marketers.
Okay, happily. Well, brands have been investing all along the years in attracting customers, loyalty schemes, trying to develop a long-term relationship. At the same time, customers seem to be every time less loyal. What do you think brands should do to regain customers' trust and preference?
Well, I think just as we talked about, the most important thing is to be human, to be relevant. So really be able to connect with the person, not trying to be average for everybody. So I think truly consumer-centric, relevant, personalized, and emotional connections with consumers become incredibly important. So that's the obvious answer. But I think the bigger answer is actually, I'm a big fan of ultimately consumers trust each other most. And ultimately consumers want to do things with other consumers. And C2C, if you like, or consumer to consumer, I think is one of the most powerful, unexploited forces within marketing and within business. And so being able to connect your consumers together, think about any brand. How often do they really connect consumers together? Most of the time we walk into a store or we go to a website and we don't really connect with other people who probably have very similar interests to us. Mm-hmm. But if you look at some of the most successful brands around, so look at Glossier, for example, the beauty company. Emily Weiss created that from a blog where people loved sharing their secrets, their tips about beauty. And so it became a true community. And then the community said, let's create a business out of this. Let's create our own cosmetics. Or look at a brand like Rafa, which is the cycling brand. It's really about how people love going cycling, and they share their photographs and they share their stories about cycling. Now, yes, Rafa makes cycling uh, uh, gear, so textiles and clothing, but that's almost secondary compared to the passion, which is for cycling. And Clay Christensen said, focus on the job to be done. The job to be done is the thing which people have a passion about. We should not be focused on our products. We spend too much time thinking about products. We should be thinking about what can people do with those products. I buy a bicycle, but that's because I love cycling. Or I buy cosmetics because I love beauty products, or I want to look better or feel better. So being able to think about what do we enable people to do, not just what products or services do we sell, but what do we enable people to do becomes really important. And then connecting them, helping them to do that together better. So whatever they love, be they love food and wine, or be they love driving cars, or be they love art or movies, connecting them together. And so many marketers or so many brands just do not connect their consumers together. And they have so much potential if they did. So what is the community? What is the passion your consumers share? And how could you facilitate, not control, but facilitate a community where they can share their passions even more?
Okay, yes. Can you tell us a bit about your future accelerator process?
Yeah, so basically, I spend quite a lot of time with senior teams, and they might be big companies or small companies. So I mentioned Microsoft before, and I also mentioned a small fashion company before. So typically, the future accelerator is a way of getting a team of people to think about the future together. And what so many companies do is they make a big mistake of they employ consultants, for example, and then they expect the consultants to go away and come back with a magic answer. And it doesn't work like that, partly because the consultants don't understand the business as well as the executive team do themselves. But secondly, there's no engagement, there's no buy-in to it. And so the consultants come back, and it's cold. It's not really their work. So what I do is I spend time with brand teams or leadership teams of companies big or small, and get the team of people together to think about their future. And that's fantastic. Firstly, for team building, it's fantastic because they all share in this view of the future. But it also means that they stop and they think about, well, what does the future look like? And you often find many different people in a team have different views as to what the future look like, but they never spend time thinking about it. So in very simple terms, the future accelerator is three parts, and it can actually be done in 3 days. And part one is about opening up, and it's about really understanding what does our future look like over the next 10 years, 5 years, 3 year, and 1 year. So it's kind of starting from outside and then working backwards. So let's get to a common view as to what the future looks like and what we want the future to look like. The second step on day two or workshop two is then about saying, how can we design a business for that future? And so developing lots of ideas very quickly, lots of concepts, and they might be products and services, or they might be entire business models. So think about what do the designs look like. And then in the third step, saying, what are we going to do? So which ones matter most to the future? Which one achieves our dream best? Which one's most relevant? And which one do we believe we can be most successful commercially and with customers? And from that, developing a roadmap, a future back roadmap, which goes 5 year, 3 year, 1 year. This is what we want to achieve in 5 years, and this is what will matter most. This is what we want to achieve in 3 years, and that will matter most, and this is what we achieve in 1 year. Put it all on one piece of paper. Put a very simple financial target for each of those 5 year, 3 year, 1 year, and also then create a story. And you can tell the story because it's not complicated, it's on one piece of paper. You can tell the story, this is where I want to get to in 5 years' time, And to get here in 5 years' time, this is what we need to do in 3 years' time, and this is what we need to do in 1 year's time.
Okay.
And at the end of that process, the team of people feel as though they've achieved something which they're all committed to. It includes all of their ideas, and they want to make it happen. And the best part is because they've jumped to the future and worked backwards, they will not do what they're doing today, because the danger is that they kind of just keep doing today and keep trying to improve or do a little bit better what they do today. Instead, they're doing it from the future back. And that's the real difference. So it's about accelerating the future and making it start happen tomorrow.
Building the future. Okay. Well, in a way, you have already given some answers on this issue, but what do you think are the main challenges for marketing nowadays and in the future? In a way, you have already talked a bit about it. But...
I think solving the big problems. You talked about the Wicked Seven beforehand, which is the project which Philip Kotler and Christian Sarko have been working on. They talk about how you really need to understand how all the small problems are connected, and that the small problems are actually connected to the big problems. And I think we spend too much time trying to solve small problems when we perhaps should be trying to solve the bigger problems. And we have these fantastic tools, the new technologies available. So be they in terms of artificial intelligence or blockchain or 3D printing or whatever it might be, we have fantastic technologies by which we can solve problems in fundamentally different ways. And, not the current book, Business Recoded, but my previous book, Game Changer, I really got a big insight when I talked to Google about how do they try to change the game. And I'm sure you're familiar with Google's X laboratory, so where they think about future ideas, their moonshot lab. And it's very simple, and many people have talked about it now in business, but the Google X principle of why try to be 10% better when you could be 10 times better is so true. We spend so much time trying to be 10% better, making the lights on the car, a little bit better, making the car go from 55 miles per gallon to 55 miles per gallon. It's not real progress. It's just doing the same thing slightly better. But if we set ourselves that 10 times challenge, which Google talk about, so not for the car to go 50 miles per gallon, but to go 500 miles per gallon, we solve the problem in a different way. And that's the important thing. We see the problem differently. We apply different tools to it. And maybe we end up with a car which goes at 500 miles per gallon. Maybe we end up with a car which goes at 250 miles per gallon. It doesn't really matter. It's faster than 55 miles per gallon. And so being able to stretch ourselves, being able to solve bigger problems, I think is one of the biggest things. And as long as that, as well as that, I would say two of the things. One is use the power of networks, which we talked about, networks of technology, but networks of consumers, and businesses or brands as platforms for good. So they would be my three things: brands as platforms for good, the power of networks, and solving big problems.
Yeah. So as I think that in a way you have already answered a bit of one of the questions that I was going to ask you. Who would be the winners of the future in terms of companies and brands? I think in a way we have already answered that.
I kind of have, but I think it's connected to the mega trends. So I think we have to look at what are the big mega trends of the next 10 years, and they're pretty clear. In my new book, I talk about them. It's the aging population, it's booming Asia, it's cognitive technologies, it's dense urban populations, and it's environmental or earth renewal. And those five big mega trends, the companies of the future are the ones who solve those five megatrends or ride those five megatrends best of all. So, being able to really think about them. And to be honest, if I look at the companies around the world who are getting closest to doing that right now, it tends to be the ones in Asia and in the developing markets. So it's companies like Alibaba, Baidu, Tencent, Pinduoduo, for example, who are fundamentally thinking different audience, different solution, and using these technologies in fundamentally different ways. They're not afraid to leap forward. And maybe one of the problems we have in developing markets is it feels too comfortable as we are. And we perhaps need to leap forwards to the future and take more risks in terms of both addressing the opportunities of the next 10 years, but also the ways in which we do it.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was thinking in one broader question, but it's not specifically as a marketer or as a manager, but actually the pandemic crisis we are crossing have been having a larger impact in all the world, and specifically in the most developed countries. Firstly, as far as health is concerned, of course, but also in terms of business and economy arena. Okay, not only in most developed countries, in all the world. Do you believe this is also this will also contribute to a new impact or to impacts in so-called world political and geostrategical equilibrium?
I think what the pandemic has made us realize is that the fragility of our world. So both government and business have recognized the fragility of the environmental world and the social world, and how much we depend on that, be it in terms of global supply chains, or be it in terms of our direct access to consumers and resources and so on. So I think it's made us realize how fragile things are, but it's also made us realize how human things are. So what things matter most. So I think what we will see is a renewed focus on the longer term. So a longer term thinking in terms of value creation and what organizations are trying to achieve. I do think people will care more about purpose and environment, and particularly society. I think social issues will become much more important even than environmental issues. So inequality and so on, and wellness. So health and wellness, and so that can be part of any brand. It doesn't just have to be a food or pharmaceutical or fitness brand. Thinking about how you can have people's well-being and a healthy, vibrant society and more positive mental outlook on the world. All of those things can be part of any brand in any sector.
Okay. And just to end our talk, I know that you will come to Oporto this year to the KSP Summit, which has been successively postponed due to the circumstances. Okay, Rui Ribeiro must be with his head full, but okay. On I think your intervention will be about your address to leading the future megatrends. If I understand.
Yeah. So I'll be talking about being a wave rider. So riding the waves of change. And I'll be talking about the chapter in my book, which is about megatrends. And if you read the book, it starts off with sitting in Cascais in Portugal, in a fish restaurant in the port of Cascais, and watching the surfers on the sea. And so I think really the challenge for any business today is to be a surfer. And so we're seeing so many changes in the world. The challenge is to surf those changes, to stay with them, to understand which are the big waves, and to find the best waves which your brand can connect itself with into the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Peter, it was a pleasure talking to you. It's the end of our talk. Thank you very much. All the best. All the best.
Carlos, thank you so much, and it's great to talk to you. And I really look forward to being in Portugal eventually later this year.
Okay.